In Proverbs 22, verses 1 through 16, the main counsel is to build your reputation on character, not clout. He starts in verse 1 by describing the blessing of a good name or reputation. It's to be desired more than great wealth. And when you have the favor of the people in your life, that is way better than silver and gold. But the problem is some people go about building their name and reputation in the wrong way. And they think the best way to have a good name is to have silver and gold, or to have power and popularity and high social status. So this section ends with someone trying to gain favor the wrong way. In verse 16, he who oppresses the poor to make more for himself, or who gives to the rich, will only come to poverty. So here's a person who's trying to make a name for himself and gain favor by sucking up to the rich and ignoring the poor. So they're trying to make a name for themselves and seek social favor in the wrong way. And they're missing the point of verse 1, because he's trying to tell us that a good name comes from good character. So in verse 2, he reminds us that both the rich and the poor share in a common humanity. A rich person has no more worth to God than a poor person. And so don't think in order to build a good name that you need to be rich yourself, or that you need to suck up to the rich so that you win their favor. If you really want a good name, you'll treat the poor with the same amount of dignity as the rich. And in verse 9, he says, he who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. Someone who builds their reputation on character shows no partiality to the rich. Instead, they realize they're just human beings like I am, and so are the poor. So if the poor is in need, I'm not going to withhold generosity and give to the rich instead. Someone with a good name in verse 3 sees evil and temptation and trouble down the road, and he has the humility to hide himself from it, instead of naively going on, thinking I can handle this, nothing bad is going to happen, and I can beat Satan on my own. No, Satan is looking for any opportunity to destroy our good name and character, and we need the humility to recognize he will get the best of us if we're not careful. And it's that humility in verse 4 that leads to true riches and honor and life. Honor there is again the idea of having a good name and reputation. If you want a good reputation, be a humble person who admits your limitations. Don't be prideful and arrogant, thinking that's the way to true honor. Otherwise, in verse 5, you're just going to fall into traps, and your arrogance will lead you into thorns and snares that lead to your downfall. In verse 6, we need to be instilling character in our children. We need to teach our kids that what's most important in life is not money or popularity or power. It's character. In verse 6 is a great time to remind ourselves the Proverbs are principles, not promises. They are general truths, not guarantees. So when he says train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it, that does not mean that that is always the case. Sometimes you do the best you can to raise your child with good character, but they have free will, and they can make different choices to disobey you and to go their own way. And it doesn't mean it's your fault. Now, it may be your fault if you fail to discipline him. In verse 15, he says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. Character is something that must be developed through discipline. Little kids are just going to go for what's easy and what feels good in the moment, which naturally is going to lead to selfishness. But as the parent, you have to teach your kid that there are consequences to their foolish behavior. You want to teach your kids that character brings rewards, but rebellion brings consequences. In verse 7, sometimes people build a name for themselves through their riches and how many people that they put in their debt. And then the poor try to make a name for themselves by trying to look rich and going in debt to do it. But they only end up enslaved. It is not honorable and does nothing for our character or reputation, either to lend money to a bunch of people that we rule over or to borrow money from a bunch of people that rule over us. And a rich person in verse 8, who oppresses the poor is sowing sin, and he's going to reap what he sows. And the rod of fury that he brings down on all these people he's lent money to, it's going to perish right along with him. In verse 10, some people don't care about honor or having a good reputation at all. All they want to do is mock and cause strife. And sometimes you've got to remove those people from your midst. Otherwise, they'll bring your good name down with them, either by guilt through association, or because they'll drag you into the fight and contention, or because they influence you to become a mocker like them. In verse 11, how sweet it is to have a good reputation to the point where even the king shows you favor and becomes your friend. But the way you're going to accomplish that is through character, not clout. You might be tempted to think the best way to earn the king's favor is to suck up to him and to give him gifts and to ensure him that you are a person of clout and influence and power and riches. But he says, actually, the best way to make the king your friend is to be pure of heart and to have gracious speech. And if you do that, the Lord will preserve you because his eyes are on you in verse 12, and he takes care of those who speak and act with knowledge and wisdom. But the treacherous who try to win the king's favor through devious and manipulative ways, God will overthrow those efforts because a good reputation must be built on character, not clout. And one of the best ways to build a good name and reputation is by not making excuses for our laziness. In verse 13, a sluggard will make up anything just to get out of having to do stuff. He'll say, I was going to go out and do some work, but there's a lion out there and he might jump out of the bushes and kill me. It's a figment of his imagination, but it shows how far he'll go just to get out of his duties. And the irony is, a man with a character like that will do whatever he can to avoid imaginary threats, but then he'll walk right into the actual threats, which is the mouth of an adulteress in verse 14. And so the challenge for us is to let God give us a good name instead of trying to make a good name for ourselves. Because anytime we try to make a name for ourselves, we go about it the wrong way. I think about Genesis 11, when the nations refused to obey God and they built the Tower of Babel in their pride. And they said in verse 4, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So they built their name on pride and power, and God completely destroyed their project. But then in the next chapter in Genesis 12, when God calls Abraham, he tells him in verse 2, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. The difference between Abraham and the evil nations who built the Tower of Babel is that the nations tried to make a name for themselves, but Abraham had the faith to let God make a name for him. And that comes only through faithful obedience to his commands and allowing God to shape our character. That's how a truly great name at the end of our life is built. That's what it means to have a funeral where people from all over come and talk about our great character and the way that we influence their lives for the better because we followed the Lord and allowed him to make our name great. And this points to Christ because that's exactly what he did. When people remember the name of Jesus, they do not remember his name because of his societal clout and how rich he was and how much political influence he had and how high his social status was. No, he had zero clout, no power in this world, no social status. In fact, he died the death of a criminal slave. Yet it was God who made his name great. In Philippians 2, when Paul talked about having a character of self-sacrifice and humility and puts the interests of others above our own, he uses Jesus as the ultimate example. And because of Jesus's character, in Philippians 2 and verse 9, it says, for this reason God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow. So as we call on God for wisdom, our prayer today is, Father, help make me a servant like Jesus, who in humility lives in line with your character, so that I won't make a name for myself, but I'll trust in the name that you give me through your Son.